and raised inflation expectations, the possibility of stagflation once again,
escalating tariffs, and weaker economic fundamentals.
Shockwaves are rippling through the U.S. economy. Growth has nearly flatlined, inflation is still climbing, and a new CNBC survey just dropped a terrifying forecast. Is America heading straight into stagflation, or is this just the beginning of a much deeper crisis? As of March 31, 2025, economists now expect U.S. GDP growth for the first quarter to clock in at a dismal 0.3%. Not 3%, 0.3. That's not just weak, it's dangerously close to contraction. Pair that with sticky inflation still hovering above 3%, and we're staring down the barrel of the one economic condition every policymaker fears: stagflation. So, what's fueling this economic stagnation? And could tariffs be dragging us into the next great slowdown? Let's break it down. Just months ago, the U.S. economy seemed poised for a soft landing. Inflation was cooling, jobs remained stable. The Fed was hinting at potential rate cuts. But then came the tariffs. In an aggressive pivot, the Biden administration imposed sweeping new trade restrictions, first on Chinese tech goods, then expanded them to key sectors like steel, EVs, and even rare earths. By early March 2025, tensions escalated into a full-blown tariff war, with retaliation from Beijing and reciprocal duties from other trade partners. Suddenly, import prices began surging, supply chains slowed, and consumer prices started ticking up again. The result? A toxic cocktail of high inflation and stagnant growth, the classic definition of stagflation. And now, CNBC's latest Fed survey of economists and market strategists confirms what many feared. The tariffs aren't just a geopolitical strategy, they're an economic time bomb. According to the March CNBC Fed survey, the consensus forecast for Q1 GDP has plunged to just 0.3%, down sharply from the 1.5% estimate in January. More than 60% of respondents blame trade policy and protectionist tariffs for stoking inflationary pressure and choking growth. At the same time, core inflation, which excludes food and energy, remains stuck at 3.2%, well above the Fed's 2% target. And this isn't just a temporary blip. Economists now say that these tariffs are feeding into persistent cost pressures across manufacturing, construction, and consumer goods. But here's the kicker. The Federal Reserve's hands are tied. They can't cut rates to stimulate growth without risking an inflation spike. And they can't hike rates without pushing the economy into recession. As former Fed advisor Danielle DiMartino Booth told CNBC, "We are caught in an economic vice. Monetary policy can't fix a trade war." Meanwhile, consumer confidence is eroding. Retail spending slowed sharply in March. Business investment is retreating, and Wall Street is spooked. Major indexes have seesawed as fears of a stagflationary spiral grow louder. So, what does this mean for everyday Americans? If this trend continues, jobs could be next. While unemployment remains low at 3.8%, the labor market is showing signs of softening. Several major manufacturers have paused hiring or announced layoffs, citing rising input costs and uncertain demand. This is the stagflation nightmare. Your paycheck doesn't go as far, prices keep rising, and job security shrinks. The last time the U.S. faced this kind of economic limbo was the 1970s, and it took years to claw back stability. Supporters of the tariffs argue that short-term pain is necessary for long-term gain. They claim that shielding U.S. industries from unfair foreign competition is vital for national security and rebuilding domestic manufacturing. But critics warn that this kind of economic nationalism comes at a steep cost, one that American consumers and workers are already paying. Even Wall Street is divided. Some analysts believe stagflation fears are overblown and that Q2 will bounce back once inventories normalize and tariffs are absorbed. But others, including several Fed watchers, warn that the path forward is murky and politically explosive in an election year. Here's the bottom line. The U.S. economy is teetering. Growth has slowed to a crawl. Inflation remains stubborn. And Washington's tariff war might be steering us straight into the storm. Is this a bold recalibration of global trade, or a reckless gamble that risks dragging America into recession? Will the White House double down on tariffs, or blink as economic pain intensifies? And more importantly, what should the Fed do now? Wait, cut, or tighten the screws even further? We're at a turning point, and the stakes couldn't be higher. What do you think? Is stagflation here to stay? Or can the U.S. escape this economic trap before it's too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more breakdowns of the biggest political and economic stories shaping our future.
The president is expected to impose reciprocal tariffs on nearly all American trading partners.
With the economy and Goldman Sachs raising the probability of a U.S. recession to 35%.
In a shocking turn of events, President Donald Trump's aggressive economic strategies are steering the United States toward an unprecedented financial crisis. As of March 31, 2025, global markets are in turmoil, with experts sounding alarms about an impending recession. Is America on the verge of an economic catastrophe? Upon re-entering office in January 2025, President Trump inherited a robust economy characterized by steady growth, low unemployment, and controlled inflation. However, his administration's swift implementation of protectionist policies, including sweeping tariffs and significant federal budget cuts, has dramatically altered the economic landscape. These measures, intended to prioritize domestic interests, are now being scrutinized for their potential to destabilize both national and global economies. First, the administration's tariff strategy has been a central point of contention. On February 1, 2025, President Trump announced a 25% tariff on imports from Mexico and Canada and a 10% tariff on Chinese goods. These tariffs, aimed at reducing the trade deficit and reviving domestic manufacturing, have instead incited fears of a global trade war. The Guardian reported that these tariffs are expected to impact all nations, sparking fears of a global trade war that could harm economic growth and increase inflation. Second, the administration's fiscal policies have raised alarms about escalating national debt. Proposals to extend the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, along with additional tax reductions, are projected to add trillions to the federal deficit over the next decade. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that these plans could increase the national debt by as much as $15 trillion, exacerbating fiscal instability. Third, consumer and investor confidence are waning amidst the economic uncertainty. The Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index plummeted to 57 in March 2025, marking a 12% decline from February and reflecting growing apprehension about personal finances and employment prospects. Investopedia highlighted that consumer sentiment dropped significantly, driven by concerns over President Donald Trump's tariff policies, according to the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, which fell to 57, down 12% from February. The convergence of these factors paints a grim picture for the U.S. economy. The tariffs, while intended to protect domestic industries, are likely to result in higher consumer prices and strained international relations. The New York Post warned that these measures could lead to increased consumer prices and production costs, ultimately harming American families and businesses. Furthermore, the ballooning deficit restricts the government's ability to respond to economic downturns, potentially necessitating cuts to essential social programs. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities cautioned that such fiscal policies could harm the very populations they aim to help by raising costs for basics like housing, food, and healthcare, and by taking health coverage away from people. The erosion of consumer and investor confidence could trigger a reduction in spending and investment, slowing economic growth and increasing unemployment. The Financial Times reported that Trump's economic policies are expected to slow U.S. economic growth and raise inflation, according to economists surveyed. As President Trump's economic policies unfold, the nation stands at a critical crossroads. Will these strategies lead to the resurgence of American industry, or are we heading toward economic disaster? The stakes have never been higher. We invite you to share your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analyses on the pressing issues that shape our world.
The right to make jokes, when you can't even laugh, you can't even poke fun at these ideas, especially these ideas that are really crazy.
This is the America we live in now, where even professional Tesla bombers are struggling to make ends meet. Where a man can destroy luxury electric vehicles by day and wave socialist banners by night just to survive. It sounds like a joke, and technically it is. But behind the satire is a serious warning about our collapsing economy and fractured political soul. In a hilarious yet biting piece from the Babylon Bee, a fictional Tesla bomber known for his bold attacks on Elon Musk's prized vehicles is now forced to moonlight at Bernie Sanders' rallies to keep food on the table. Yes, the satire is extreme, but it strikes at something very real: In today's America, even our outrage has to hustle. Published on March 28, 2025, the Babylon Bee's latest satirical article imagines a world where anti-capitalist activists are now taking second jobs just to survive under the weight of the very economy they claim to despise. In this scenario, the Tesla bomber, a character invented by the site to lampoon far-left protest culture, is forced to double up as a sign-waving, slogan-chanting rally attendee for Senator Bernie Sanders' latest progressive push. But this isn't just about jokes. The story is a mirror, reflecting the absurd contradictions playing out in the real world today. Wages aren't keeping up. Rent is skyrocketing. And in the background, a new political divide is burning hotter than ever. As of March 25, 2025, inflation remains sticky, wages stagnant, and consumer debt at record highs. According to the latest Federal Reserve report, more than 61% of Americans are now living paycheck to paycheck, with younger generations hit the hardest. The economy may not be in a technical recession, but for many working Americans, it might as well be a depression. That's where the Babylon Bee's satire punches hardest. The idea of someone bombing Teslas, symbols of modern luxury, corporate progressivism, and tech elitism, while simultaneously working rallies that demand more free government programs, highlights the ironic overlap between anti-capitalist rage and economic despair. This dual identity, bomber by day, Bernie bro by night, is funny, yes, but it also hints at the internal contradictions of today's radical left. On one hand, there's fury toward wealth inequality and climate hypocrisy. On the other, a growing dependence on the very system being attacked. The Tesla bomber needs money. Bernie's rallies pay. The revolution must now be part-time. But the satire isn't only aimed at the left. It also subtly mocks the gig economy mindset that defines modern work. The idea that even activists need a side hustle speaks volumes about a generation burdened with college debt, sky-high rents, and a housing market permanently out of reach. Activism has become performative. Rage has become a commodity. And there's another twist. Elon Musk himself, the billionaire CEO of Tesla, has become a lightning rod for controversy. Once hailed as a climate hero, now despised by many on the left for his free speech absolutism, anti-woke stances, and political shifts. The Babylon Bee, famously banned on Twitter for satire before being reinstated by Musk himself, is using this article to land another punch in a long-running feud between big tech, mainstream media, and satirical rebellion. So, what does this all really mean? It means that our economy is cracking in places we don't want to look. When even satire points to economic desperation, it's time to listen. The Tesla bomber may be fictional, but the struggle is not. Young Americans are caught between ideologies, pulled by identity politics, burnt by inflation, and squeezed by the costs of simply existing. And politically, the Babylon Bee is doing what good satire always does, exposing the surreal nature of our moment. A protester bombing luxury electric cars, while working rallies that demand more taxes and regulation, is a perfect metaphor for the confused, contradictory mess of modern populism. Critics will argue that this kind of humor is cruel, dismissive, and out of touch with real suffering. Supporters say it's exactly the wake-up call we need. That by laughing at the absurd, we can better see the truth. That maybe, just maybe, the biggest joke is the system itself. In the end, the Babylon Bee's Tesla bomber isn't just a punchline. He's a prophecy, a glimpse of a generation torn between anger and exhaustion, between destroying symbols of wealth and desperately needing the paycheck from the very rallies that claim to fight it. Is it comedy? Or is it a cry for help? What do you think? Is satire like this exposing the truth or just adding to the noise? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into politics, culture, and the war for the future of America, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell.
President Donald Trump's slate of sweeping tariffs is set to go into effect later this week.
Goldman Sachs raising the probability of a U.S. recession to 35%.
In a move that's sending shockwaves through the global economy, President Donald Trump has announced sweeping tariffs that threaten to ignite an unprecedented trade war. As of March 31, 2025, the administration's aggressive stance has left markets reeling and allies questioning the future of international trade relations. Are we on the brink of economic chaos? President Trump's trade policies have always courted controversy, but the latest salvo marks a significant escalation. On March 26, 2025, the administration unveiled a 25% tariff on imported automobiles, set to take effect on April 3rd. The White House projects this move will generate $100 billion annually and bolster domestic manufacturing. However, automakers reliant on global supply chains face higher costs and potential sales declines. U.S. giants like General Motors and Ford saw immediate stock drops, while electric vehicle manufacturers such as Tesla and Rivian experienced gains. International leaders from Canada, Europe, and Mexico have voiced strong opposition, warning of a looming broader trade war. The administration's tariff strategy doesn't stop at automobiles. President Trump has also proposed a 200% tariff on wines and champagnes imported from France and other EU nations, throwing businesses, particularly in the wine industry, into turmoil. Companies like Houston Wine Merchant are grappling with the uncertainty and potential financial impact, as such tariffs would significantly increase the cost of imported products and could deter customers from purchasing them. The financial sector is equally unsettled. Goldman Sachs has raised the probability of a U.S. recession to 35% within the next year, citing policy uncertainties and increased inflation stemming from the tariffs. S&P Global and J.P. Morgan have lowered their GDP growth forecasts, anticipating slowed economic growth and persistent inflation. Analysts warn of significant price increases for consumer goods, particularly automobiles, due to the tariffs. Despite the widespread concern, some domestic leaders see opportunity. United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain has endorsed the 25% tariff on foreign-made cars, suggesting it could quickly enhance American manufacturing jobs. Fain believes the tariffs could encourage car makers to relocate jobs to the U.S., capitalizing on the excess capacity at American manufacturing plants. The administration's tariff strategy is a double-edged sword. On one side, it aims to protect domestic industries and reduce trade deficits. On the other, it risks escalating into a full-blown trade war, with retaliatory measures from trading partners potentially harming U.S. exports and increasing consumer prices. The stock market's volatility reflects this uncertainty, with significant losses in March 2025 driven by fears of an escalating trade war. The S&P 500 suffered a 5.7% decline, its worst monthly fall since December 2022. Global markets are in turmoil as Wall Street heads towards its worst quarter since the pandemic of 2020, driven by fears of a global trade war and erratic U.S. policy under President Trump. Gold is experiencing its highest quarterly gains since 1986 as investors seek safe havens. The White House is poised to announce sweeping tariffs affecting all nations, which could exacerbate economic uncertainties. As the world watches with bated breath, the question remains: will President Trump's bold tariff strategy fortify the U.S. economy or plunge it into recession? The stakes couldn't be higher, and the outcomes more uncertain. What are your thoughts on these aggressive trade policies? Do you believe they will ultimately benefit or harm the U.S. economy? Share your opinions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analysis on this developing story.